Corbyn 100% in this election. Disappointing to see that he lost, obviously. He says, this is Biden, you're also going to see people saying, my God, Boris Johnson, who is a kind of physical and emotional clone of the president, is able to win, former vice president said, according to poll marks. The Biden's remarks mirrored immediate post-election reaction from centrist pundits on this side of the pond, Twitter, late Thursday, as exit polls made clear that Jeremy Corbyn lost pretty decisively. Warning from across the pond to Dems flirting with Bernie and Warren, tweeted National Journal Politics editor Josh Kraushaar, referring to the leading 2020 Democratic presidential contenders, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So this is the reaction here from Mehdi Hassan, who is a British Muslim progressive journalist. He says, quote, "Oh God, here we go with left can't win takes. The UK political situation, while similar in some ways to the US, is also massively different to the US on so many other different levels. For the start, the US isn't trying to actively leave the EU. Anyway, UK result depressing all around, obviously." This was really a bad news the argument was that it was very, very much bad news for Corbyn and for Warren and Sanders. NBC News' first read headline said that on the election results. Last night's election showed the limits of campaigning and winning on an ideology, wrote NBC's Chuck Todd, Mark Murray, and Kerry Dan. CNN's John Avalon said, right-wing populism beats left-wing populism. That's the very, I think that I could do a whole show really on that subject. I do want to play a little bit of what he said here. Unfortunately, Glenn won't be able to hear this, but here's what he had to say.
Breaking news, major breaking news. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Conservative Party won a commanding majority in the United Kingdom. This was a wipeout election. John Avalon is here to tell us why here in the United States, Democrats should be paying very close attention. Sir.
Absolutely. Democrats should be paying close attention to the Labour Party's brutal beating in the UK elections last night, because it's a cautionary tale as they prepare for the 2020 primaries. On the one side, the UK had an unpopular Conservative incumbent, a charismatic nationalist with a truth-telling problem. Polls show that Labour should have been primed to take back 10 Downing Street, but they decided to stick with an unreconstructed socialist, Jeremy Corbyn, in a party dogged by accusations of anti-Semitism. And Corbyn's personal record of admiration for leftist autocrats from Cuba to Venezuela, a muddled message on Brexit, someone who promising to nationalize utilities and spend more than $100 billion remaking society. Put in American context, Jeremy Corbyn makes Bernie Sanders look like Bill Clinton. But he was beloved by the party's base and young voters who boosted him on social media. And so despite polls showing that Corbyn was the least popular opposition leader in almost a half century, they decided to take the leap, convinced that the unpopularity of the Tories meant maybe they could sneak Corbyn into 10 Downing. Not so much.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of interesting narratives there. And I think the idea that the polls had him within striking distances there, as he says, was just not the reality. But here for Glenn, he says, Democrats should be paying close attention to Labour Party's brutal beating in the UK elections last night, because it's a cautionary tale as they prepare for the 2020 primaries. Polls show that Labour should have been poised to take back the 10 Downing Street, but they decided to stick with an unreconstructed socialist, Jeremy Corbyn. I think there's a lot of context to that story and that framing that I would like to offer, but again, we do have some more stories to get to, and we can't go all day on that. But speaking of reporters in the Oval Office, Trump himself sees on the UK election of a possible harbinger of what's to come in our country, meaning that he will get re-election. But again, pretty much to sum it up here, I do want to obviously get to Glenn, leaving him out of this conversation, but I think it's like the reality situation is I think our standard, our political, I think the main idea that rebuts this is our political center is so much more to the right of Britain's political center. We're not actively trying to leave the EU. That Brexit issue was the whole thing that kind of threw a kind of kaleidoscope in the way politics currently was. It made everything so much more confusing, so much more fragmented in ways that it normally isn't in British politics. That just doesn't exist here. and the media, at least for now, is not nearly as tough on Bernie as it was on Jeremy Corbyn. So what was your take on that? How do you see this playing out? How does this affect the American elections?
I don't know. It just makes me nervous. Yeah, I mean, it makes me see Trump being elected again is a real possibility. I don't think we should, take it for granted that all these demonstrations we're going to see on Tuesday night are a reflection of the way a lot of America views his presidency. I mean, Hillary Clinton had a majority of the votes and she lost. And if Republicans are clever and they manage to campaign in the right states and say the right things, you never know what might happen. And if Democrats get demoralized about the impeachment thing, they might tune out on politics. They may not be as motivated to come out to the polls because they're so disillusioned by Washington. There's any number of things that I can think about that can keep me up at night. I'm not feeling real good right now.
It's what would you say that you're most concerned about?
Well, Trump being reelected, but I guess that's not your question. You after something more specific?
I do get what you're saying there, but like in terms of like what do you think? I guess if I could make it a little bit more specific, like what would be the thing that you're most worried about that could lead to Trump getting elected?
Well, pretty much the same playbook that they did in 2016, where they just saturated Facebook with ads, which is what they're doing now with the impeachment. Getting help again from the Russians, sending out all kinds of misinformation to frighten Americans about whoever the Democratic candidate is. Just really dirty politics that could smear the opposing party and put enough question marks in Americans' minds that they wouldn't take a chance on a Democrat. I mean, a lot of Americans will say, well, Trump, we know who Trump is, and he hasn't put us in a war. The economy is great. We do have that trade war with China, but I'm confident he's going to fix that, and we'll just take a chance on him for another 4 years. I can see a lot of white America coming to that conclusion.
Where do you see the most effective lane being for the Democrats to take coming in the 2020 election that will give them the best shot at taking back the White House?
I think, strangely enough, I think that a candidate who more in the mold of Biden, except Biden has so many gaffes. If we had a candidate that didn't have, who wasn't such a visionary as Warren, someone like Warren, I think scares a lot of Americans because she's going to shake too many things up at once, and she's going to screw around with our health care and God knows what else, and all these crazy ideas about her wealth tax. They all sound good on paper, but what's it really going to do to America? America is fine the way it is. There's a lot of people who are afraid of change. I mean, I think of the Nixon campaign in 1968, and what was it, 1972? He won by a landslide, and he didn't really run on anything. He basically just ran like the way Trump did, where he was like a law and order president, and but he didn't really have any grand vision, and he didn't scare any Americans about what he was going to do as president. He was just kind of keep things the way they were and maybe deregulate some things, and which is pretty much what Trump did. And I think that's kind of how Biden is going to run his campaign too. And Biden is just the not Trump candidate, and if he doesn't unnerve Americans about his social plans, which he won't, more people might vote for him.
I mean, I really do get the sense that, like, I mean, and obviously we're probably going to end up disagreeing on this, but I do get the sense that people are a lot less, I think, comfortable with the way things are. I think people, especially if you look at people electing Donald Trump, taking chances on people who you would previously never ever thought would get close to elected office, and people like Boris Johnson, and in a real reminder that elections do have consequences. Britons right now, they're gearing up to defend the NHS from a privatization scheme that seems almost inevitable at this point, with Tories winning strong majorities in the UK elections. Like the thing that we fear, and I mean a lot of people, NHS defenders, are getting very, very nervous about that because, of course, the NHS being on the chopping block in the deal, the trade deals that the UK is going to have to negotiate with people like the US, selling off the NHS for parts to the US and other big healthcare companies once Brexit is all done and dusted. But I think that's a real reminder that elections do have consequences. I really do worry about Biden's ability to get people out to the polls, get people inspired, and get people being like, hey, we really have to go not just beat President Donald Trump, but actually fight for a better world. Like, we can't go back to normal, back to the way things are, because, I mean, Americans, before they're drowning in student debt, they're not able to pay for their health care. I mean, barely kind of struggling to get up above water, or stay above water with their finances. I mean, things like income inequality in this country are rising massively. Nothing ever seems to be getting done. Like, I'm really worried that normal is not serviceable for so many people in this country. And I think if you just got someone who's saying to the richest people in America, nothing's going to fundamentally change, I just worry about how are people going to get out to the polls in that way. That's my big fear.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of resonate with candidates like that too. It's just that I'm thinking of, I'm not just thinking of progressives. I'm thinking of moderate Democrats in the Rust Belt and what they're thinking. I think the healthcare issue that you were talking about is something that resonates with them. I just don't know how far they want to go with it, like Warren and Biden or Sanders do. So I think you can kind of campaign on bread and butter issues and the income inequality issue, certainly, and the tremendous debt that the U.S. is amassing. There's all kinds of things you can campaign on, but you have to be careful about the details of your plan. Because the problem with Warren, I think, is that she's giving too many details away, and she's kind of scaring Americans a little bit by upsetting the apple cart too much and wondering how that's going to affect our economy and how is that going to change America, and is it really going to be for the better, and are we willing to take that chance? Americans are very conservative people for the most part, and so yeah, I just worry about all these big ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, if you look at some of at least the result for the last primary, you got someone who, as you say, is the moderate coastal candidate who all the elites are comfortable with in Hillary Clinton, and she does well on the coasts, but Bernie absolutely kills her in the areas that I think are struggling the most, like Michigan, Wisconsin, like all those states, Pennsylvania, all those Rust Belt states. She was pretty well and even swamped in those primaries because I think people are the people most likely to support those Democrats like Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg. So those are people who I think want to keep things